Have you ever wondered if the laws of nature could, for one single miraculous moment, be completely rewritten? Picture the scene, the fine white dust of Etosha National Park in Namibia, rising like a ghost under the African sun, a heat that seems to vibrate in the air and fill your lungs. The air smells of dry earth, of life, and of imminent danger. It was on this stage, so vast and indifferent, that a story unfolded. A story so improbable that if it hadn't been witnessed, no one would believe it. A story that begins with the most shocking image the savannah could offer: a lion, the undisputed king of that land, standing before a baby gorilla, small and fragile, on the verge of death. The savage logic of the wild would dictate a swift and brutal end. But what happened that day, and especially the reaction of the other gorilla, the family's leader watching from nearby? Believe me, it defied everything we think we know about the animal world. What followed was not just an act of mercy, but an event that would echo for generations in that land. No one, not even the oldest elders of the region, was prepared for how that encounter would end. It all began with a silence far too tense, even for the savannah. And at the center of that silence, a family of lost giants far from home, about to face their greatest nightmare. Can you even imagine a family of lowland gorillas with their thick black fur and ancient, intelligent eyes trying to survive in the heart of Namibia? It was a surreal sight. They were led by Django, a colossal silverback whose shoulders seemed to carry not just his own weight, but the fate of his entire family. His eyes, normally calm and thoughtful, now held a constant spark of anxiety. They were lost, displaced from their humid, dense forests for reasons only the great mystery of life could explain, and now they found themselves surrounded by the endless horizon and sparse vegetation of Etosha. Little Ayo, a baby gorilla no more than 2 years old, was the joy of the group. His bright, curious eyes explored everything, and his clumsy tumbles drew tender sighs from his mother. Django watched him with a silent devotion, a guardian who knew that Ayo's fragility was the most vulnerable point of his entire lineage in this merciless land. The dry air chapped their nostrils, used to humidity, and the hard, dusty ground was a brutal contrast to the soft carpet of leaves of their former home. It was as if they had been torn from their paradise and thrown into a golden, scorching purgatory. The first sign that the universe was about to test them cruelly came with the drought. The waterhole, the only source of life for miles, shrank each day, becoming a stage of tension where predators and prey stared each other down in a fragile truce. And it was there they saw him for the first time. Cory, a lion with a dark mane, the color of sun-scorched grass. He didn't roar. He didn't have to. His power was announced by his slow, deliberate walk, a movement of pure authority that made the ground subtly tremble. Every step was a declaration of dominance. He watched the gorillas with a gaze that seemed to pierce the soul, a cold curiosity that sent a shiver down even the mighty Django's spine. Did you know that gorillas have a range of vocalizations nearly as complex as our own to communicate danger? But before Cory, Django emitted only a low, almost inaudible grunt, a sound that said, "We are here, but we want no trouble." It was a plea for peace in a land that rarely granted it. And here, we learn the first lesson. Sometimes, the greatest show of strength isn't confrontation, but the wisdom to choose peace, even when fear tightens its grip on your throat. Have you ever felt like that? A giant in a strange land, having to protect those you love from a fear that seems too large to face? The tension was palpable, like the electricity before a storm. No one knew it, but destiny had already drawn its lines, and a silent tragedy was about to unfold. The days that followed were deceptively peaceful. Django, though ever watchful, allowed himself moments of pure fatherhood. Can you picture that? Mountain of muscle and fur, a being capable of uprooting a tree, sitting patiently while little Ayo comically tried to imitate his famous chest beat. The sound from Ayo's chest was a muffled pat, 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 a soft echo of the thunder that was his father's. Django would respond with a low, affectionate grunt, a sound that vibrated more in the heart than in the ears, a private dialect of love and protection. Io's mother groomed his fur with infinite gentleness, and the little one felt like the center of the universe, safe under his father's watchful eye and his mother's gentle touch. It was one of those perfect pictures, an oil painting, of wildlife at its purest, blessed by the golden light of the late African afternoon. That small family, exiled and out of their element, had found a rhythm, a fragile sanctuary in the midst of the vastness. But fate has a cruel way of reminding us of its presence, and it chose the most ordinary moment to strike. As Io chased a colorful grasshopper near a thorny bush, a sharp cry cut through the air. It wasn't a playful yelp. It was a torn sound, filled with a pain no creature so young should ever know. Django was by his side in 2 strides, the ground trembling beneath his weight. His experienced eyes scanned the scene and froze. On Io's small leg, 2 tiny, almost invisible puncture marks from which a dark bead of blood was beginning to well, and slithering away, the unmistakable V pattern of a puff adder, one of Africa's most venomous snakes. A terrifying fact about them is that they don't need to be provoked. Their camouflage is so perfect that the simple act of passing by can be a death sentence. They trust their venom, and that venom was now coursing, treacherous and silent, through little Io's veins. Panic set in like a sudden plague among the group. Io's mother scooped him up, making sounds of anguish, while the little one cried, a cry that slowly turned into a weak, feverish whimper. A helpless fury burned in Django's chest. He could fight any lion, face a pack of hyenas, but how do you fight an invisible enemy? How do you fight death itself flowing inside your son? The lesson here is harsh but real. Life can change in the very instant we feel safest. It is a brutal reminder to cherish every laugh, every moment of peace, for we never know when the serpent is hiding in the nearby bush. Have you ever lived a moment when everything seemed perfect, and then, in the blink of an eye, the world turned upside down? It's in those moments we feel so small. Stories like this, which remind us of life's strength and fragility, touch us deeply because, in the end, they are about all of us. Io's leg began to swell, his breathing grew shallow. The sun began to set, and Django knew the darkness would bring the cold. And perhaps, the end. The darkness on the savannah is not like the darkness of a city. It is a thick, velvety darkness that swallows light and amplifies every sound. Io's cries were no longer a sound, but a frightening silence, broken only by shallow, trembling breaths. His small hand, which once gripped his father's fur tightly, now rested limp. The venom was a silent thief, stealing the warmth, the color, the life from his small body. Django held him close to his massive chest, trying to transfer his own warmth, his life force, into his son, as if by sheer will he could push death away. The cold desert night air was another enemy, and the fever burning in Io was an internal battle his frail body was losing. Take a deep breath with me now and imagine this scene. A father, a king in his own right, reduced to a trembling guardian, cradling his only son and looking up at the cold, distant stars, as if searching for an answer that would not come. Impotence gave way to frantic action. Django, in flashes of memory, recalled the leaves his own mother used to treat fevers and pain, back in his native forest. He stood up, placed Io gently in his mother's arms, and began to sniff the ground, tearing up clumps of the dry, sparse vegetation and chewing them desperately. But nothing smelled or tasted right. The earth here was different. The plants were hostile, covered in thorns. Did you know that gorillas in the wild are like instinctive pharmacists? They know exactly which bitter leaf to chew to cure a stomachache or fight parasites. But here, in this exile, Django's generational wisdom was useless. Every leaf he spat out in frustration was another nail in the coffin of his hope. His strength, which could topple a rival, was useless against an enemy he could not see, touch, or crush. And as if the internal torment wasn't enough, the external danger appeared. 2 golden points glowed in the darkness about 50 yards away. Corey, the lion, was there. He didn't approach, didn't snarl. He just watched, lying with a terrible calm, a patient statue of death. He could smell the sickness, the weakness. To Django, this was the final humiliation. Not only was he losing his son to venom, but he would have to protect his body from a predator waiting for the inevitable. The lesson here is profound. Sometimes, the universe puts us in situations where our greatest power is useless, forcing us to face our absolute limits. What do you do when all doors seem to close? When physical strength, money, intelligence, none of it works? Where do you find the strength to take the next step? It's a feeling of powerlessness that cuts to the soul, isn't it? Django's story shows us that courage takes many forms, and his was about to be tested in a way he could never have imagined. As dawn approached, a cold, heavy resignation settled over Django. He had done all he could. Now he was just a father holding his son, waiting for the last breath. Each tremor in Io's body was a stab to his heart. He looked at Corey's golden eyes, still watching from the darkness, and he no longer felt rage, only a deep exhaustion. That lion would be the gravedigger of his lineage, the final period on his family's story in this strange land. He braced himself for the attack that would surely come when the scent of death finally overpowered the scent of life. He would defend his son's body until his own last breath. It was the only honor he had left. It was then that the script of nature was completely torn apart. Corey stood up. Django's body tensed like a steel spring, muscles coiling under his skin, ready for the final explosion of violence. But the lion did not charge with a hunter's speed. He walked forward, step by step, slowly, almost hesitantly, with his head low. There was none of a predator's tension in his shoulders, but something that looked like caution. Django let out a warning roar, a thunderclap that echoed across the silent plain, but it was an uncertain, confused sound. Why wasn't the lion attacking? A few feet away, Corey stopped and did something unbelievable. He emitted a low, guttural sound, a chuff, a puff of air through his nose that, in the complex vocabulary of lions, is a friendly greeting used between pride members. It was the equivalent of saying, "I come in peace." To Django, this was as alien as seeing the sun rise in the west. Now I need you to stop everything and try to visualize this scene with me. The giant gorilla, paralyzed between the instinct to protect and the purest disbelief, and the lion, the apex predator, breaking a code of conduct thousands of years old. Corey took another step, lowered his magnificent maned head, and ignoring Django's latent threat, he focused on the small dying Io, and then the unthinkable happened. He extended his tongue, a tool as rough as sandpaper, designed to scrape meat from bone, and with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature of his size, he licked the swollen, dark wound on the baby gorilla's leg. Once, twice, 3 times. Did you know a lion's tongue is so rough it can strip the hide from a carcass? But at the same time, that very roughness powerfully stimulates blood circulation. It was an act that made no sense. It was dangerous, it was intimate, it was tender. The lesson here is mind-blowing. Help can come from where you least expect it. Our greatest perceived enemies can, by a twist of fate, become our saviors. Think about it. How many times in your life have you judged someone by their appearance or reputation, only to discover a completely different heart inside? This story really gets to you, doesn't it? It's shocking, unbelievable. The air stood still. The predator and the protector, united by an act that defied logic. But the question that hung in the cold night air was this an act of salvation? Or the prelude to an even greater tragedy? Imagine the silence that followed. A silence so deep, so charged with meaning, it felt as if the very pulse of the earth had stopped to watch. Corey, after his inexplicable act of compassion, took a step back and lay down in the dust, his front paws outstretched, his head low. It was a submissive posture, an offering of vulnerability that no king ever offers another. His golden eyes never left Django, not with defiance, but with a kind of calm expectation. The ball was in the gorilla's court, the lives of everyone in that clearing depended on the answer that would come not from the mouth, but from the body and soul of that desperate father. And it was in this silence that the truly shocking reaction, the one the title promised, occurred. A civil war raged within Django. Every instinct, every muscle fiber, every drop of testosterone in his blood screamed at him to charge, to crush this threat, to protect his young from the predator that dared to touch him. Do you have any idea of a silverback's strength? We're talking about an animal with the power of 10 men, capable of tearing tractor tires apart with its bare hands. The power coiled in Django's arms at that moment was enough to end Corey's life before the lion could even react. It was the law of the jungle, the logical response, the only response he knew. But his eyes saw what they saw. The gentleness, the absence of aggression, the lick that was not meant to harm. And then Django made his choice. The shocking reaction wasn't an attack. It was the opposite. It was the absence of one. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the muscles in Django's shoulders relaxed. He didn't turn, didn't completely lower his guard, but he broke the intense, direct eye contact with Corey, looking down at little Io in his arms. It was a sign that crossed the barrier between species, a silent communication that said, "I saw. I don't understand, but I accept." He let out a grunt, but this time it was a different sound, a low, deep rumble that vibrated in his chest. It was not a challenge, it was an answer. And here is the most powerful lesson of all. The greatest form of courage sometimes isn't to attack, but to have the strength to trust, to go against every instinct of fear and take a leap of faith. Think about it. What is harder? To attack what you fear, or to have the courage to trust what you don't understand? For an instant, time in Etosha stopped. There was no longer predator and prey. There were only two fathers, a lion and a gorilla, united by a thread of hope in the darkness. And as if the universe had been waiting for that truce, a small miracle occurred. A soft moan escaped Ayo's lips. His eyelids fluttered and opened for a fraction of a second. There was life there, a stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. The venom was still in his body. The battle was not yet won, but something had changed. The lion's intervention, whatever it was, had given Io a chance to fight. With the first rays of sun, the magic of the night did not break. On the contrary, it was revealed in all its glory. The soft pink light of the African. Dawn illuminated the scene. Django still held Io, whose chest now rose and fell in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The fever had broken. The swelling in his leg, though still there, had visibly lessened. He opened his eyes, no longer clouded by pain, but with a faint glimmer of recognition, and reached out a hand to touch his father's face. He had survived. The darkness, the venom, the fear, all of it had been conquered. Django hugged him with a gentleness that betrayed his size, and for the first time in many hours, the great silverback felt hope warm his heart once more. Corey stood up, stretching, his golden body in the growing light. The moment of tension had passed. The truce was complete. He walked to the edge of the clearing, and then he turned for one last look. It wasn't a look between predator and prey. It was a look of acknowledgement, a silent nod between two kings, two fathers who had shared a night outside of time. Django met his gaze, and for the first time, he didn't see an enemy. He saw his son's savior. He slowly nodded his head, a gesture of gratitude that Corey seemed to understand perfectly. Then the lion turned, and with the same silent dignity with which he arrived, he walked into the tall grass and disappeared, leaving behind not a trail of fear, but the memory of a miracle. It is a fact that science is still hesitant to admit. The capacity for empathy, for acts of altruism that defy the logic of survival, is not a human monopoly. The story of Django and Corey is living proof of that. That day, Django led his family away from that place, not with the desperation of a fugitive, but with the wisdom of a leader who had seen the impossible become real. Their journey would still be long, but something fundamental had changed. They had learned the final and most important lesson of the savannah. Compassion is the secret language of the universe. It is the bridge that connects worlds, that tames beasts, that rewrites destinies. Their story became a legend, whispered on the Etosha wind, A reminder that even in the wildest of natures, the greatest force of all is not that of teeth or claws, but of a heart that chooses to help against all odds. And you, what legacy of compassion are you building in your world? Always remember, no matter how savage the world may seem, one single act of kindness can change everything.